Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of FECG TV. I'm your host, the proud owner and CEO of the Fisher Educational Group. My name is Sean Fisher, and here we focus on bringing current topics in education, focusing specifically on things that are affecting uh, people of color and the Black population with regards to the realm of education. We bring great speakers to you who are professional experts, are very highly functioning in their area of expertise. Today, we have a great guest, Dr. Warren Glen, brother that goes way back for me. We went to the same university together. He's a subject matter expert in alternative education and dropout prevention, which are two areas which disproportionately affect Black students, African American scholars. And I just kind of wanted him to come today and just kind of talk to us about what's going on in the field, what he's seeing, what trends are happening, what things we could do differently to offset the impact of both of those areas. So today, Brother Glenn, just take a moment to introduce yourself. We're thankful you're here, so take a moment to introduce yourself.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we go back to our University of Toledo days where I had more hair on my head than I did on my face, for that matter. I don't think either one of us had these beards back then.
Right.
And we were in the College of Education together, which was basically a handful of brothers in the college at that time. And so you basically knew everyone, even if you didn't know them, you knew their faces as well. So I've been in education officially when I got my undergrad since 1998. And 1999 is when I started teaching high school, and that was when I started teaching at Toledo Rogers. So I've always worked in a urban setting where it had a high risk of students potentially dropping out since then, and then been able to work in the Cleveland area, and then went into what I'd say the dropout recovery or prevention type of programming when I became the director of the Life Skills Center of Trumbull County, which is located in Warren, Ohio. And at the time, the only thing I knew about Warren, Ohio was that it was my first name. And I would see the signs all the time driving around. And so I had an opportunity to ask a friend of mine who lived in that area about how many Black people were there. And it was kind of interesting because I grew up in Twinsburg, and just wondering, where I didn't grow up, it wasn't a majority of Black people in Twinsburg, but I knew where I was going to be working. I want to know, is there Black people there? And he said, that's where all of them really are at that point. So I said, okay. And so I went there, and really going in kind of blind of the whole dropout situation, because growing up where I grew up and how we grew up, you didn't drop out of high school. You finished. And for those of us that did not finish, it was basically maybe one or two people that did not graduate high school at that time from where I graduated from it. And it was more so not because they were a large amount of credits behind. They were basically a class or two behind, whether it be a government class or a math class. And so going into dropout prevention, there were students that were coming to the school that were grades behind, which was definitely different from me from that perspective in that respect, but still wanted to get their high school diploma because I work with students who were struggling as well as a high school teacher where I taught in the Cleveland public school area as well. So you knew the difficulties that students were dealing with. So I was able to kind of pivot a bit in regards to my career and go into the dropout recovery program, as I said, as a director or an administrator of a program in Trumbull County, Ohio. And so I was able to do that, and starting out with a total of 25 students, and then growing that building to over 150 students, and then going on to start other dropout recovery schools for white hat management that was established at that time in the Cleveland area, and then becoming a regional superintendent and assisting with schools in the state of Ohio, as well as in the Phoenix area as well, when it came to our school that we had there. So I was able to get involved in that and be able to do those things at the first part of my career for about 6 years at the time, until, in a sense, kind of like the budgeting kind of came back and bit us in the end. And so I found myself going into higher ed at that point. And so I was out of it for a period of time. It was focusing on higher education and what I really wanted to do with that, as well as pursuing my doctorate degree, which I did. But then having an opportunity to come back in after being out for about, I'd say, about close to 10 years and coming back into it. And so recently going back into it, I was working with another management company where we had schools that necessarily did not focus on the high numbers of students that were enrolling, but a lower number to be sufficient as well. And then with that, I wound up changing from that location and now working for the Ohio Department of Education, which is more so the Office of School Sponsorship, with assisting those dropout recovery programs, whether it be with compliance, enrollment, staffing, as well as credentialing for their students to be able to assist them with being able to achieve the graduation rates that are needed, as well as understanding the report cards that are coming out for them so they can meet the metrics so they don't get a letter of potential closing, because that's the last thing you want to do for schools that service a population of learners that are, in a sense, growing in so many ways. Because what I've seen is that economics actually helps perpetuate the dropout situation. It's not that students aren't necessarily intelligent enough, it's the economics that start, and it starts young with them, and also the education of the parent and being able to work with them. One of the things I discuss is, and I got this from the Office of Administration here, where it comes to the Centers for Administration, I got it from, where it talks about the first 2,000 steps of a child, where they talk about being able to get a child prepared academically to be able to go into elementary school, kindergarten, really, where you want to make sure your child has the understanding of sight words and understanding certain colors and knowing how to spell their name, for that matter, going into it, or even some of the basics, tying their shoes. So what happens when you have children that are behind in that area going into kindergarten? Well, you can't just fix that sometimes within a month's time period. They're basically a year, in a sense, behind at that point, because there's other things, and those are just surface levels that I'm going into, but there's other things that they're behind on. So, and some of those things could be shapes, obviously, and I said colors. Then there's obviously, as I said, your sight words, which are huge words at the end of the day, something like stop, go, on, off, that they see every day. And if you're not able to understand what those words are when you see them, then that's a problem as a child, especially at that young of age and everything. So you want to be able to start them off and putting them in that situation to start them in the right direction, because what happens by the time they get into middle school, they're still behind. And then when they're about to transition to that 9th grade, they're realizing that something's amiss here. And then they become the problem student that people think, well, they need to be put on an IEP. Well, they don't need an IEP. They need actually additional tutoring at that time period. And so those are some of the things that I was able to discover and everything, which put me into where I am today, as well as obviously my research through my dissertation as well. So, and then obviously the life experience that helps me with these things too as we move forward.
No, thank you for the powerful introduction. Great resume, great experience. Actually, there's a segue. So to my listeners, we always want to focus on bringing guests who have lived experience. So thank you, Brother Glenn, for actually detailing your experience so that my listeners know that they're actually hearing someone who has practical experience. So these things that you're giving out as pieces of advice or information are actually things that have been tried, true, and tested.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you kind of touched on my next question, but I'm going to ask you to delve into a little bit more detail. For those who are unfamiliar with the realm of alternative education or dropout prevention, give us a textbook definition of what that field of education is.
It's an alternative to the traditional school, which offers an alternative type of education to assist learners that are either a grade or two behind to receive their high school diploma. And that's what they're able to do in these types of locations. So it's an opposite of the traditional school district, so that they're not necessarily being funded through that same school district. It is the total opposite. That district has no relation to that child anymore or anything like that, or to their educational outcomes, or actually there's no ties to the educational outcomes of that new alternative district to the traditional district as well. So it makes it a separate type of learning situation for that student. And also these locations, the alternative setting is going to be for students who are either between the ages of 15 to 21 or 16 to 21, depending on the alternative charter agreement with the state. So you're looking at those things. And I say 21, but we really can go to age 22 going into almost 23, because at that point you want to make sure the student has enough credits where he or she can have the opportunity to still earn their high school diploma. So if you're 21 years old and you go into an alternative setting and you only have 5 credits, and you're going to be 22, and then you have up until that 23rd birthday, you're going to want to be able to look at if you're able to earn these credits in a given period of time. Because at that point, you're not necessarily what we call a traditional age high school student anymore. You're basically working and you're experiencing the realms of the reality of real life. So depending on what type of sessions you're trying to go to, you might not necessarily be as successful there. And so that's when the conversations would have to be had. So we say 21 so that it gives the student the opportunity, if they want to go on somewhere and then get a GED through another program like an adult diploma program, that will be able to assist them being able to do those things as well. So there's different levels that will be able to assist students at a time, but more so I'm going to focus on the secondary level with that instead of the adult diploma types of programs which cater to students who are 22 and older.
Thank you for the detailed answer, especially around delineating for us the difference between traditional and non-traditional students.
Yes. And then also just to go a little bit more into it, these alternative settings are usually in an area where you're going to have a district that has low success rates, so that they're going to easily be able to funnel students to that alternative setting that they either can't do anything with or won't do anything with, for that matter, so that they can funnel them to you, as well as an area where you're coming in more so as the person with the white hat. You're going to be the savior to a lot of people in that area because you're helping students earn their high school diploma at that time. So these are usually low economic community areas, as well as that have high crime, low economic stability as well. So you're coming in and you're bringing an establishment there, which will show basically an improvement in the area because you're going to have a facility that might have been closed down for a period of time, and you're reopening that facility and making it into an educational facility that, again, is no longer an eyesore in that community, but now more so a place of business that's basically being able to recreate revenue in the area because you're starting to get a population of people come there. So you're also going to be helping out some of the other local stores, whether it be a drugstore or grocery store, whatever it may be. People are going to start frequenting it because you're now having a population of learners who might have spare cash on them. They're going to go to those stores at a given period of time. You'll start seeing more foot traffic in those areas too as well. And then you'll see partnerships being created with community leaders, such as a lot of clergy, as well as politicians in that area as well, to help support it. And so you'll start seeing more people such as that being able to come out to assist the growth and development of that. So, and that also brings, the board members that will consist, some of them might consist of being in that general area. Some of them might be from outside as well, maybe from another school board that you're able to put on this particular board as well, but could have a familiarity with that location until you can have people from the community being able to sit on that board so that will have a vested interest in regards to the outcomes of the student populations that you're serving.
Thank you for taking the time to highlight those additional perspectives, especially around the strategic engagement and family and community engagement. That's the key, and I didn't think about that. So actually, I'm going to maybe pair back around to that a little bit later on and ask you to go a little bit more in depth.
Sure.
So clearly, just from what you just highlighted there, you have a lot of experience. So I want to play on that experience and actually ask you a two-part question, and let me get that out before you start answering. So what is your vision for effective dropout prevention, and what does it look like when it's done right?
Okay. My vision for effective dropout prevention is ensuring you have the right types of staff to be able to meet these students where they are and to help bring them up to where they need to be. Because one of the things that happens is that you'll see in some of these schools that you're hiring people who did not get a job in a traditional setting a lot of times, because not everybody's coming into these types of settings initially. So you have to make sure as the school leader or superintendent, whoever's doing all the hiring, that the people that you're bringing on board really have a good understanding of who these students are and the population that you're going to be serving so that you can actually help them. Because understanding you're going to have someone who's 16 years old who has no credits and might actually be at a 8th grade reading level. So understanding of how to work with them to help get them at least to a ninth grade reading level and showing the success of that, as well as you want to be able to make sure you're hiring people that or staff that understand that the economic impact that comes into the students' learning aspect is one of the things you're going to have to be able to tackle, and how to understand those things as well. And making sure that the facility there is conducive to those things. And when I say that, making sure that students are coming in and they're able to be fed, for that matter as well, because there's no reason trying to say someone's going to learn and they haven't eaten from the last time they were there. So you want to make sure that they're being well fed, as well as being well received from the staff, and being able to understand as a staff member, you're going to, in a sense, not meet them as someone who says they're coming in as a freshman, but someone who's really coming in as a 8th grade or 7th grade type of learning style, but you have to get them up to the 9th grade, and making sure that you're putting them in programs to get them to be successful as well. Because one of the things that helps make it successful is making sure that students can see early success. That's the one thing that happens, because they're used to not seeing success. And so they're able to walk away because they're like, well, I don't see anything at this point. So you have to be able to give them a visual, and that starts with a plan. And that's an academic plan, so that the student knows what they have versus what they don't have, and how they can achieve these things in a period of time. And then going back to after they've achieved some things, so they can see how the needle is starting to move, because that helps with the student retention. And then you're looking at being able to get them outside type of assistance as well. So many of these students, obviously, they're in financial straits, so they want to be able to work. So you want to be able to work with your vocational specialist to help them find gainful employment, or even if it comes to assisting, whether it be their mother or another guardian they're living with, to help them with those same types of things as well. So that's going to be the initial aspect of finding success early with our students, so that they can see the success, as well as not necessarily looking at it, this is a huge mountain that I have to now try and chomp off, but understanding I'm taking it bit by bit. And that's the success levels that you're able to see with the students, so they can actually see it themselves. And the outcomes of it, what I'm looking at from my own personal perspective, is being able to obviously see the cohort of students that are seniors being able to graduate. So let's say you have a cohort of 12 students graduate, you at least want to see a minimum of 10 students graduate out of that cohort of 12 graduating. And then having those students go into a post-secondary type of environment, not a 4-year environment, but more so a credential or an associate degree type of programming, so that they can be in a similar area that they are familiar with from their high school experience. Excuse me. Because what will happen if they go to some place that they're not familiar with, it'll be basically, they'll be a fish out of water. And so they still need that same type of hand holding that they were previously getting before, to actually take them through some things step by step, but then also showing how they can do some things on their own, and then having the support they need. So one of the things that I would definitely encourage, and this goes back to my dissertation, is creating an articulation agreement with a local area community college to assist these students once they have received so many credits that they can begin to go into a pathway of a post-secondary type of credentialing or associate degree, so that they can go into a career. Because in the meantime, many of these students that we're working with, and they should be doing this, is that they're in a credential program as it is, because they're so far behind. So many of these students are in a medical assistant credential program, they're in an STNA program, they might be in a building maintenance type of program. So they're being able to graduate with an industry through an industry credential type program. And so what we want to be able to do is have this articulation agreement set up where they could have what we call stackable credentials, where they already have one credential, then they have another credential that will actually help them be that much more employable, as well as have that much more earning power, and then be closer, to earning their associate degree, because those credits would transfer automatically into an associate degree program. So then at that point, they would only have basically 1 year left of completing their associate degree. So not only would they have their high school diploma at that time, but then they'd have a credential, and then potentially earning another credential, and then going into an associate program where they'd have 1 year left, and potentially from that same college earning a scholarship and coming out debt free. And that's the whole objective at that point, to be successful so that they can see things that is happening to them that they didn't know that could actually happen from that dropout recovery program, because they have those articulation agreements already established. So they know the learners that are coming there from that dropout recovery program into that community college, which makes it that much familiar. Then in addition, which will the successful outcomes will be, is that, let's say if that student who is an alumnus of that dropout program, they can still go back to that high school and get the same type of help they were getting before, as well as get the same help at the community college. So that's how the articulation agreements are able to assist one another at a time, because you're retaining students at the secondary level as well as at the post-secondary level, and creating a pathway for success for them as they matriculate into the post-secondary environment, and then going into what we call the real world with the benefits and skill sets and educational background they need to be successful, to have a nice career.
Thank you. So it looks like it comes down to, it's definitely about the relationship building. Just as you were talking, I just took a few notes, and I'm going to work my way backwards.
Okay.
So not just about the getting the diploma or the credit recovery, but there's also that post-secondary piece, making sure they're ready for the career and college readiness.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And building that self-efficacy, like their belief that they can be somebody, they can achieve more than they thought they could.
Right, because it makes no sense for anyone to get a high school diploma from these programs and they're not going into some type of career path. Because a high school diploma, from my studies, you're only going to be able to make a certain amount of money. That's a low amount of money. You're still going to be basically in the food service industry, to be honest with you, with that. So you want to be able to go into, as I said, a career. So a career type of industry, so that you can actually be able to have a salary at this time, and understanding the difference between being hourly versus salary, for that matter, being into a career, so that you can actually have the opportunity to go on to somewhere else.
Yeah, and it looks like, I'm just going back to my notes. It looks like you start your approach for achieving those items by first hiring right, getting the right kind of person in.
Yes.
And then also that logistical support, making sure that the actual facilities are in such a manner that they can support the student, whether it's food or social emotional needs, those things.
And transportation, because one of the things that we want to be able to do is really have students who are coming to the school that are within a 5-mile radius a lot of times. So where they can catch a bus, it's always going to be on a bus route, so that students can catch a bus and they're able to receive bus tickets throughout from the school as well, so they can get to and from. And they're basically 3-way rides to school, back home, and then back the next day. So they're able to do those things for those that need transportation. So you want to be in an area like that, because when you're like 10 miles away, students aren't going to drive 10 miles for school unless they're in a private school, for that matter. But for dropout prevention, a 5-mile ride on the bus is basically like 45 minutes. And that's not because they live so far away. It's just because that's how the bus ride is, the stop and go on, for that matter. So that's more so what they're going to do when it comes down to it. So you want to have the right types of area where transportation is easily accessible for them.
Thank you. That's some great additional information. I just put that in my notes about transportation. Very important. Kids actually got to be able to get there to learn.
They got to be able to get there.
Right. So just kind of segue, as I'm listening to the great gems that you're dropping, clearly, and I articulated this earlier, clearly you've had a great deal of experience. For those that are looking at going into this field, can you kind of lay out for us how you prepared for your current position, or how did you prepare for this work?
Well, for those that are looking to go into it, definitely be open to learning from the student population that you are serving. As a school leader, college professor, former secondary classroom teacher, principal, whatever, the biggest things, the best thing that I learned came from the student population that I was serving at that time. And understanding that you can learn from a child if you listen, but also you're preparing them for the next level that they're going to, but they're also preparing you for the next group of students that you're going to be engaging with. So it's kind of like you have the yin yang type of learning process, where it becomes a circle of learning from both individuals and understanding these things. Because one of the things that we come into when it comes to working with this population, you, myself, whoever is educators, we're coming in privileged. And when I say we're coming in privileged, is because we're coming in with multiple resources of technology that we have at our disposal. We have probably multiple streams of income as well to support that technology. And then understanding that our learners, they don't have that. So we have to be able to have a dialogue with them of understanding where they're coming from and how they want to be able to get there, and also being able to understand their frustrations. And so that we're pacing them in a way that we're not going to say, okay, we'll take this home and do this when you get home. No, we have to say, we're going to say this for tomorrow for when you get back. We're going to work on this when you return, because a lot of times when it comes to some of our learners taking a laptop home, that they're never going to see that laptop because it's going to be used for so many other things at a given time. So we have to put them in a situation of understanding where they are, and then also where we are, how we can bring the two worlds together and coexist and bring each other up at the same time. So that's one of the things I would definitely tell someone, is being able to understand your population and be able to learn from them so that you can educate them where they are, but still bring them up, and understanding that it's okay to experience what you experience, but understand there is another way of life as well. And I'm going to help you be able to see these things, but then also using yourself as an example. One of the things that I do as a college professor, and even when I was in a lot of buildings, a lot of times daily with students, is giving them real life experiences that I had as a student their age, as well as when I was in college, so they can understand there are a lot of losses that come along with success, and letting them know that just because Michael Jordan might talk about, you see a quote about talking about how he got cut and all these other things. Well, there's a whole lot of things where they don't talk about so many times that he got beat by the Detroit Pistons a lot of times as well. So I put my same life situation to that for them, and letting them understand that, yes, I needed help with mathematics. I needed help with reading comprehension, and letting them know that when I could read anything and sounded great doing it, but remembering what I just read was a skill set that I didn't necessarily just have. And letting everyone know that that's a commonality sometimes, where people can read things and then they understand that, okay, their issues are kind of normal, and understanding how they can get over them as well. And that we become human to them, and understanding that we are human beings, being an educator going into it. And then also understanding, if you're going to go into this as an educator, that you're not going to be able to solve everything overnight. You're not. That there's going to be a lot of initial losses at the beginning. Some of those losses is going to deal with student attendance. Attendance has always been an issue dealing with students who are in dropout recovery. And then also understanding that you're being hired as a teacher, but you're also being hired to do student retention. So in understanding this in a dropout recovery program, you're not just in a situation where you're just going to just be teaching students daily. You're going to be responsible for calling these students. You're going to be responsible sometimes for doing home visits with some of these school leaders as well, and making yourself available to a point where you're almost taking on a social worker mentality as well, going into these types of situations, because that's the type of assistance that your student learners are going to need. Then also you have your day-to-day responsibilities of being a classroom instructor, making sure you're managing your classrooms as well. So it's a little bit more difficult than the traditional realm. And that's why you don't see a lot of people running into it as heavily, but we're starting to see more of it happening now as we are in the 2020s now, compared to in the 2010s and even the 2000s, at a time when I had got into it, where people weren't necessarily doing it because it was awkward. And that population was basically, we're supposed to just leave them alone. And now realizing that this is a population of students that need a lot of assistance. And so that's what I would say, definitely going into this as a classroom teacher, that you definitely need to understand. You're going to have a lot of patience, and you're going to have thick skin. You're going to have to know how to de-escalate a lot of things, because a lot of students are coming in with a lot of mental trauma. And that trauma can range from a lot of variety of things in there in your classroom, and you have no idea what it is at a time. But you have to learn how to really de-escalate some things, as well as engage in some crucial conversations with some students as well, and know how to document situations so that there is a paper trail of situations that can help yourself as well as the other parties that are involved that can be used later on down the road to assist.
Thank you for that great answer. So I'm going to push you a little bit more, Dr. Glenn, press you for a little bit more detail.
Sure.
So we talked about teachers and staff, but let's think about the perspective of an education leader in the field of dropout prevention. So if there was someone who was interested in the field leadership-wise, what advice would you give them as far as preparation? And before you answer that question, I want to talk about I want you to start, before you talk about the overview of those intangible competencies they need to be successful, talk about the specific, I guess you would say, the technical expertise they need, maybe the certifications, those type of things, and then go into what they need personality-wise.
Well, believe it or not, for dropout recovery high schools, you don't have to have the technical certifications that a lot of people would assume that you need in traditional schools. You don't have to have that. It's nice, and it actually helps sell the school, especially when you are working with the traditional districts, because they know that there is a certified, competent school leader from the Department of Education from that respect. So those are the things that definitely will assist. Then also you want to be able to understand budgeting, understanding numbers in regards to your full-time enrollment numbers versus students and when you're going to have to pay some things back. So you're going to have to understand school law. That's going to be huge when it comes to that, even though some people might not have the background, but you still have to understand school law. You have to understand state competencies to make sure that your school can stay open, for that matter. And many of those competencies that have to be acquired are coming through your student learners. So that's how it comes down from your student learners. It has to trickle down to really your school teachers that you have there to make sure that students are actually progressing and understand how to be able to show student improvement year to year, for that matter. And it's not necessarily just a 1% improvement, but more so a 3% improvement. And I'm going to go back to the financial aspect. You have to understand dollars so that when it comes to the students that are enrolled versus the students that you might be losing month to month, and how you're able to maintain a budget and financing of that school off of the student enrollment, and being able to keep your lights on, being able to pay your staff. So you're paying your staff off of student enrollment. So you obviously have your startup monies and everything like that. But basically, you want to be able to do your improvements of your building, the maintenance of your building, as well as maintaining your staff and paying into the state teacher's retirement. So you have to have an understanding of those things as well when it comes to if you want to either own or operate a school as a school administrator or even as a superintendent. You have to understand those things, because as well as you have to be able to communicate on a variety of levels. And communication is definitely going to be key. Because for one, you're going to be communicating with students, which is basically how you're getting your business is being able to operate on a daily basis is through students, as well as through the parents of those students. You have to be able to communicate with them, as well as the stakeholders within it. That's your board. And so you have to be able to communicate to your board, and that's really who you report to as your boss. And so they're going to want to be able to know the P&L at the end of each month, as well as the academic outcomes from your students that are in and out of your building on a regular basis. So you have to be able to have those types of conversations on different levels at any given day, and understand that you can have a plan for the day, but that plan can be thrown out the window because there could be a student fight. There might be a couple of teachers that don't show up that day, and then understanding how you're going to be able to do all those things. And you still have a board meeting you have to attend at 6 p.m. And you have to be able to make sure that the board books are done prior to that, so that they've already gotten all those things prior to, and so that you can present the numbers that are there. So, in understanding that, so that's one of the things that you want to understand when it comes to operating a school going into it. But obviously, as I said, going back to the first question, was the technical skill set, more so the credentialing. You don't have to have a certificate, an administrative certificate. Now, some districts do require it. And when I say some districts, those are going to be districts that might have a management company or a district such as a traditional school district that has now began to offer an alternative setting to their district. So basically, you are now hired by the school district at that point, but you're still offering an alternative environment to the traditional setting. So they're going to still want you to have those types of credentials coming in because you're now under their requirements and their boards as well. So that's what they're going to be looking for that. So it's going to vary. If you're an independent dropout recovery program, then you're not going to necessarily have to have those credentials. But if you are a dependent, like say, if you have a management company or you still report to a school district, then they will want you to do those things. Where I have the opportunity working as a sponsor, I work with both in both settings, where we have a district in our Youngstown area where we have a school leader that has those credentials. And then I work in another area as well, in an Akron area, where they were just able to get an emergency certification. And until they were working on their certification and then got it within 2 years, which was fine at that point as well. So you'll be able to get like an emergency certification to be able to do these things as well. So it's not anything that will actually go against you. But if you're working for a district, then they're going to require you to have the same thing that their traditional school leaders have as well.
Thank you. Great information. I'm just thinking about, let's continue along the lines of the responsibility of school leaders in the dropout prevention field. How should a leader, or no, actually, you know what? I'm not going to be that general. Let's be specific. As a school leader in dropout prevention, how do you prepare your staff for this work?
Well, before the school year starts, you have a series of professional developments so that they understand what is needed to be successful for the upcoming year, because every year is different. So one of the things that you want to prepare them for is the number of students that need to be enrolled per month to month, so they can see those things as well as making sure how we are going to prepare our students to pass end of course examinations and what that looks like, and how the number has got to increase from the previous year to this year. And one of the things you want to be able to do is set your staff up for success so they're not blindsided by something. Because one of the things with working with the Department of Education, we know what's going to be expected of us now for next year. So it's not as if anything has come out like the same year. We know what's coming down the pike right now for next year. So you have to start getting them ready. And some of those readiness types of programming is either going to come at the end of the year or during the summer when they're coming back to do these types of programming. And then also keeping them informed of legislation. One of the things that we want to be able to do is that when you have staff meetings as a school leader, you want to talk about legislation that is being potentially passed or has passed, so that your staff can begin to, in a sense, mentally and physically prepare for that next step and what that looks like. All right, because you're now going to be graduating a cohort that is not going to have anything to do with the new set of rules. So you have to be getting that new cohort that's going to be seniors ready for what's coming in. So you understand that now. So communication is key on rules and regulations and laws to be able to assist with the student learners, as well as making sure you have the financial support to be able to have the right types of educators there and support programs to assist the learning outcomes. Because it's one thing to have your teachers being able to teach the things they need to teach, but there's also going to be some other type of support systems that are going to be in place to be able to assist these student learners as well. Sometimes it could be where they can do packets or tutorials from their phones, for that matter, which is really big. So there's going to have to be an onus of the student in understanding how to communicate that with them as they become seniors. And so what that means is that we would have to teach our instructors how to have, or even some of our school leaders as a school leader, you're going to have what you call a senior seminar meeting, so that the seniors for that new cohort and the juniors and sophomores will understand these are going to be the recommendations of yourself for the next school year, so that when you move forward, so that it's not just the staff that's understanding this, but the students understand it. But you say it in a way in which the students can understand it from, and in a sense, layman's terms, so that it's not throwing them off or confusing them, but they're set up to be successful so that they're not going in blind. Because that increases the relationship from teacher to student or from school leader to student, so that they can have that circle of trust, so that no one is saying, well, I'm a senior, I should be done. And then at the last minute, you're saying, well, no, you got to do this test. Well, that's going to have them run away. And one of the things that we want to do is make sure they know that, okay, you've achieved this, but we've always been still talking about X, Y, and Z, and we're going to prep you to do X, Y, and Z, so you'll have success as well and be able to graduate again. So that's one of the things that you definitely want to be able to do, is have those levels of communication when it comes down to it. Then also understand what your budget looks like for the current year as well as for the next school year as well. Because sometimes the things that you thought you're going to be able to do, you can't do because you don't have the student enrollment. And then also understanding what that looks like and being able to get your staff on board to assist with the student enrollment that can help with being able to financially support your school, and letting them be clear as how this works to be able to support staffing as well as other types of curriculum they might need or technology they might need at the building. So being able to increase the enrollment will be able to do those things as well as being able to retain the students. Because a lot of times what happens is that, say, you might be able to get an influx of more students. And so one of the things that you and your staff have agreed upon is that if we reach 250 students, this will allow us to be able to hire someone to strictly focus on retention, so that then the retention aspect won't necessarily fall onto the classroom teacher, where they can just teach. So if you have someone who's following on those things, that helps alleviate stress in a lot of different areas. So then the only thing the classroom teacher has to do is just get some information to the retention specialist at that time, so then they can just focus on what they're doing. So having those types of conversations and making sure everyone understands what the outcomes are to be, and being that person of being able to communicate on different levels with your board, with your parents, community members, that will also help when it comes to going into this and being successful as a school leader. And then also being able to say, you know what, I was wrong, and being able to admit, but we can change some directions, as well as listening to your staff. That's key when it comes to moving forward, because this is not an anomaly or anything like that. You have a team of experts that you have hired as the school leader. So what you have to do is trust them in regards to things that they're telling you could help grow the school, and allowing them to take some ownership of it as well. So you want to be able to divide out responsibility amongst your staff, so that, again, as a school leader, you can inspect what you expect from your staff at the end of the day, so that at the end of the day, it's not just necessarily you, but then you can say, okay, it's also you who is supposed to follow up on these things as well, at these things that you told me that you were going to be able to meet these things at this point. I gave you all the things to be successful. So you want to be able to build other leaders from that as well, and show them how they can grow as leaders. Then also on some things on how everyone can necessarily be able to make a pivot together when you don't see things going the right way, and have those lines of communication. Because at the end of the day, you want to be able to grow your staff and let them be the spokesperson for your school. So,
No, thank you. Actually, my next question was, how do you effectively communicate your vision to stakeholders? But I think you expounded greatly on that, very in depth. So I think we can skip that question.
well, you know what? There's more to it. One of the things you have to do.
Oh, let's go. Let's
Yeah,
go.
one of the things you have to do in regards to that, you have to be what you call a transformational leader. And being that transformational leader, everyone has to be able to see your vision. And that vision has to be communicated, whether you're at the coffee mug, or get some coffee for that day, and you run into your English teacher, and they have to understand what your mission and objective is. That's one of the things when I do interviews for different jobs, or when I'm having a discussion, I relate everything back to the mission of the program. Because if it doesn't relate to the mission of the program, you're basically having a non-meaningful work conversation. You're just having a gossip conversation at that point. So you want to make sure everyone understands that everything needs to focus towards this. And that's when you become that transformational leader, where everyone is now talking that, even to the point students are talking it now. And so you have to have, obviously, a transformational leader to oversee everything, but everyone else has to be transformational as well. Because what happens that next school year, you have a different vision and goal. And so you have to start that all over again as well. And you have to be what you call dynamic as well in regards to the presentation of that, where people can feel the energy from it so that they're like, wow, this is very contagious. And then for those that can still feel it and they don't like it, they're going to leave. And so you can get rid of all the iffy ones real quick so that you can replace the iffy ones with someone who's going to be very strategic as well as goal oriented and will be transformational themselves. And that's how it goes. When you have a transformational leader, that's going to be able to help get rid of all the iffy ones because they're going to be discussing the mission, the vision, or the objective at that time in any given moment, and how anything they talk about is going to relate back to that.
Perfect. So that clear, unapologetic communication and that alignment between the vision and the mission statement and what you're constantly marketing.
Exactly.
So absolutely. And everything comes back to what's our mission, what's our vision, what's our goal.
Exactly. Right?
Forcing everyone to constantly reevaluate, decide, is this the right field for me? Is this the right area of work? Do I belong here? Am I personally aligned? Is my personal mission and my personal work ethic aligned to the organization's mission statement?
Right. Exactly. And that's part of the interview process when you meet someone at that time, so they understand that if this isn't one of the things that can meet to your professional objective, then that's fine. This might not be the place for you. And it's good to know that early than later on. Because sometimes people, again, they're coming in just for a job for right now, not for something they could see for a foreseeable future. So one of the things that you have to do is be able to assist them or understand, like, how does your career relate to this? And give me an example of how your career relates to our mission and vision. So that you're constantly getting the thing. And then again, when you start hearing the iffy ones, and those are the stutters, the ums, and you're like, yeah, we're going to wait a little bit longer before we fill this position because I'm not getting the warm and fuzzies from this person.
Oh, thank you. So I would be remiss in my duties if I didn't address the pandemic. So doing this work, it's already tough enough on its own, but how has the pandemic impacted your ability to deliver, I guess, effective dropout prevention services?
Man.
And actually, before you answer that, it's a twofold question. I want to know, just in general, what's the biggest barriers to delivering dropout prevention services, but then how has that been exacerbated with the introduction of the pandemic?
Well, the biggest barriers that we deal with being able to give dropout recovery education during the pandemic is ensuring that students still come to school, because many of our students live in school district where their friends are able to have the option of still learning remote, because with legislation here in Ohio where some schools can do those things. Well, with our schools, they have to be in person, because in regards to make sure they can improve their report card for the next school year so they don't get a closure notification. So you're dealing with that. And then also you're dealing with the fact that some of their family members might have COVID. You have students who aren't getting vaccinated, which is clearly their choice for that matter as well. Then you have staffing, when it comes to being able to deal with these things as well, being able to assist students at a given time period where they have low staff at a time because they now have COVID. So you have to, in a sense, work smarter in understanding that in this point, let's say you have a school where you have a population of educators that have COVID. Well, you can't shut down the school because of that, or you can't go remote. So you have to utilize your calamity days at that point. So if you have like 4 teachers out and you only have maybe like 7 staff members there, well, it makes sense where you're going to have to close the school for the next 5 days, for that matter, in order to ensure that the students can come back and have a conducive style of learning, because you have staff there for that matter. So you have to understand how to work those things out. Now, on the flip side of it, schools have been able to receive a large amount of finances to support them at this time period. So you're able to get ESSER funding for your schools at this time period. So with those ESSER fundings, you can begin to pay staff on a different level if need be. Then you can hire additional staff. You're able to do that. You're able to do additional repairs to the buildings that you were not able to do at a given time period. Then also increase technology and curriculum at a time period because you have X amount of dollars. So that actually helps out in a long run when it comes to things that you necessarily didn't have in the past that you now have. So that does help out. But then you have to communicate with everyone, letting them know that this is not going to be a constant. This is a for now. So that does help be able to get people over the hump. But obviously the technology is going to be there to stay. But as we all know, with technology from any type of funding, that does get outdated. And sometimes that can get outdated within a year or maybe 2 years, depending for that. But at that time period, you've been able to supplement that with hopefully increased enrollment for that time period. So you have to be able to understand how to utilize the rules that have been created to support as well as go against you, but then be able to still educate your students that are coming into the door and making sure everyone understands what you as a school cannot do. Because right now, obviously, a lot of schools cannot do a virtual type of learning process for their students. They have to be in the building, as well as you cannot close down the building for an X period amount of time, and understanding that as well. And then also understanding that, some schools were able to mandate a mask mandate, and then other schools were just saying, we're not going to mandate it, but we're going to enforce students to wear it here for that matter. And they've been doing that for that matter as well. So understanding how to navigate those things to make yourself successful. Usually in a dropout prevention type of program, you're going to be able to garner more support than in a traditional setting. Obviously, in traditional settings, you have a lot of school districts that are getting hit upside their head because they want to implement a mandate on masks. Then you have others that aren't doing that. So in a dropout prevention type situation, you have a smaller population of students. So you have a little bit more leeway and more one-on-one conversation with parents, as well as students who are coming in the door. And many of those students are basically, even though they might not be adult in age, they're adult in mindset and they understand it for that matter. So you can do a lot of different things to be able to assist. So, but being able to circumnavigate, you also have to pay attention to the state mandates that are coming up in regards to COVID protocols and how that could affect you in regards to your outcomes. So, and I say that because your outcomes can be affected as to what's going on in the traditional school district where you are located versus what you're doing. And your students sometimes might leave and say, you know what, I'm going to go back to my traditional school because they offer virtual, and the alternative school setting is not giving that opportunity. So you have to educate your learner, letting them know that you can go back there, but you're still going to be even further behind at that point, because here's what the statistics are of students in regards to working virtually versus working face to face. And so, but ultimately it's going to be their decision, but you have to be able to be ready for those types of crucial conversations with your learners before they try and go back to their traditional school at that time, because they think it might be easier, but they're really setting themselves up for failure at that time if they don't understand where they are academically.
Thank you, Dr. Glenn. It always comes back to communication and being
Yeah,
intentional on purpose.
it's always going to come back to communication and how it's communicated and who is communicating it and when it is communicated.
And a certain intentionality and purposefulness as well.
Exactly. So the earlier, the better. And so they understand the impact of decisions that they might want to make versus staying the course of understanding that. And so, one of the things that comes up when it comes to dropout prevention is, say if you have a student who is 16, and I'll say this here even for Ohio, and they leave a traditional school to go to a dropout recovery school, that actually helps that traditional school's report card. That student comes off their records. They don't have to show any types of outcomes from them at that point. So their report card increases, where they become a record of us at that point. Even if they were to leave us and go back, we still have to we're going to show that we lost the student at this point, even though they might have progressed at that time. So, but we're still showing we lost the student. They went back here at that time period. So We want to make sure the district knows that by them coming to us and us working with them, it helps them with their outcomes. And then the student finishing with us will actually help them because we have our articulation agreements, being able to assist them, as well as even during a pandemic time period, to be able to assist them in a way where we're going to meet them where they are. And so that level of transparency of communication will be able to help them in the long run, so they're not doing a back and forth, but they're able to make a valid decision about their education before they try and leave and go somewhere else and do anything.
Oh, thank you so much. So this is rounding up to our last question. And this is a big question, so I'm gonna give you time to kind of process it and then give us your awesome in-depth answer. So what advice would you give to other school leaders looking to pursue a career in either alternative education or dropout prevention work?
The advice I would give them is, again, have a good understanding that you're going to be held accountable for numbers, and understanding you're not just necessarily the educational leader, you are the business unit leader. And this is definitely a business at that point when it comes to numbers of students that are enrolling. You also need to have an understanding of marketing and how that plays out, social media, how that plays out with your school, and marketing to be able to market your school. You have to have a good understanding of that, because if you don't, you're going to be eaten up alive and you won't survive. Then understanding month-to-month metrics. I would highly suggest that if you are someone that wants to go into this, you definitely need to have an understanding of budgeting and understanding what we call a carrying number. A carrying number is obviously the number that you're taking over week to week and month to month to help the P&L for your business unit. And your business unit is your school. And understanding that education is a business and you're in the business of educating students. And you have to
Dr. Glenn, could I pause you really quickly?
Sure.
For those that may not be aware of what P&L is, could you articulate or elaborate for us?
Sure. P&L is profit and loss. All right. And your profit is the number of students you have for the month of that school. Your loss, or what you call in the business world bad debt, are the number of students that you thought you had that have dropped out because they were not attending or whatever it may be. And then you have to pay that money back. All right. And you want to make sure you have a low number of bad debt for the month, so your school can be profitable and so that you can also stay employed. And understanding what those numbers mean when it comes to running an educational business unit. And so that's those are two words that aren't necessarily used publicly when it comes to education, because each school is a business unit. As a dropout recovery type of school or a charter school, even traditional schools, they're all business units, and they have to make so much money per month because it's budgeted and projected to be able to make so much money. And so you want to be an overly profitable type of unit, and understanding that. Sometimes people come into these jobs just thinking, I'm going to be dealing with student discipline, I'm going to be dealing with curriculum, and those are the last things that you're dealing with, because you are going to be focused on the financial success of the building. And that comes to student enrollment, let alone the other things that you have to deal with as well, such as understanding a unit of credit and what that looks like as well. But the main thing that you're going to be responsible for is the financial success of the school. So I would definitely encourage whoever is going to go into this and wants to go into this is understanding the financial aspects of the school and how you, as the building leader, are going to be responsible for that. Whether it's successful or non-successful, everything comes back down to the building leader when it comes to the financial success of the building. And so in having an understanding of that, I would definitely encourage you to take a budgeting class, in whether it be a business, whatever it may be, because you're going to need that. And it transfers over. It transfers to whatever you're trying to do, because you're going to be basically creating a budget when it comes to the teachers that you're going to be hiring, or if you're in a situation like that, as well as when it comes to the maintenance of the building, because you're going to have to pay someone to clean the building. You're going to have to pay someone to do the landscaping. You're going to have to pay someone to do the snow removal, all those things on a regular basis, and how that comes out of your bottom line, and so that you can see how this looks. And then being able to negotiate salaries with teachers and understanding sometimes you might have to defer some of your money to get a good special ed teacher or to get a good math teacher or a science teacher. So those are three teachers right there that are not going to come cheap. No matter what setting you're in, you're not going to get them for cheap. I don't care if they come straight out of college. They know that they are a unicorn. Especially if you're looking at, you have an opportunity and you're going to hire a Black male. And there's nothing wrong with actively seeking to hire a Black male special ed teacher or a Black male math teacher or a Black male science teacher. And if you're able to find one, you're going to be paying a lot more because they have an opportunity to go wherever they want to, because they have that type of credential to be able to do these things. And you're a unicorn at that point. They're like, you actually exist. It's sort of like myself and obviously and yourself, Mr. Fisher, when we first started our careers off, where people are like, you actually have a degree in education. You get to stare, the haze look at you like, you really want to teach? And it's like, yeah, I want to teach. I have some other things too. And people were really alarmed at that, being Black men. So you have to understand these things going into it as a school leader, where you might have to defer or have some other incentive type based programs to work with your staff that's coming in to the building, because you have to fill these positions, and understanding how, if you're going into a school year with a vacant position, how that hurts you. And then being able to be creative to have an alternative type of setting. So let's say if you don't have a current intervention specialist there on hand, you have to basically work with a program that can provide those same services, but you're basically contracting them at that point. Then also understanding you're going to need a psychologist as well, and some other outside support types of services to be able to assist in understanding the financing of those things. So bottom line, the financing is going to be there. As a school leader, you're already going to have the experience of working with various populations of students, and you should. And when I say that, is that you have to look at it, you're going to be working with a population of students that are coming from a variety of different areas. Some of them are going to look like you, some of them are not going to look like you. But understanding that the commonality that they have is that they have low academic success and low economic success, and understanding how to work with that in an arena to be able to provide academic success, and how later on that matriculates to economic success for those students. So that's definitely, my closing note in regards to that, as someone who's going into that. And if they would want to, then understanding that it does take time, it doesn't happen overnight. Always be professional when it comes to how you're engaging with everyone, because everyone's watching you, no matter what, and they want to see how you respond to certain situations, as well as being able to, and I go back to this as well, communicating on all levels at any given time period, so that everyone feels that they are inclusive and you're not talking at them, but to them, with a resourceful response that they can take with them. And understanding as a school leader, where you're dealing with students who might have behavior issues, understand that suspension isn't the only way to address students, because they've already been suspended. That's the one thing you have to understand. You have to come up with creative ways to be able to find ways for them to learn the things that they've done before in the past was wrong, but how to engage in the future so that they know how to correct their wrongs, for that matter as well. So I hope that answered everything.
No, it did indeed. Definitely. Thank you. With your vast experience, any answer you gave us, we value it as gold.
Thank you.
So your last answer concluded our interview. So thank you, Dr. Glen.
All right, you're very welcome. The pleasure was all mine. I always love being able to talk about something that is a passion of mine, and I've definitely been able to see it grow from when I got in the 2000s. I always say that, from Cash Money Millionaires and everything. And understanding that and being able to see it grow, because when I got into Dropout recovery, it was probably going to be 5 years and then it was going to be done, because they were saying, oh, we're going to end this. And then you start seeing it just continuously grow in different ways, which were beneficial, obviously, to the student learners. And that's what you want to be able to do, is see how they are to progress and matriculate into everyday society as being productive citizens with having a meaningful career and not necessarily going into prison.
And that's a definite reality. School to prison pipeline and
Yeah.
disproportionate representation. It's real. It definitely is
No,
real.
it's definitely real.
So I truly applaud. Yep, I truly applaud. Let me get my words together here. I truly applaud the work that you're doing. You're literally saving lives. You're teaching other people to save lives too. So appreciate it.
I try.
Yep. So let me go ahead and get into this closeout. So everyone, our listeners and our viewers, thank you for joining us on this podcast. And I'd like to give a special thanks to Dr. Glen again for joining us. If you just joined us, today's discussion was around alternative education, specifically in the realm of dropout prevention. And our guest was Dr. Warren Glen, who has been in this field for over 20 years, since 1999, right? So definitely we got
2000s.
There we go. There we go. Definitely provided us with some great information to make some differences. Everyone, please take a moment to watch this podcast in depth, take notes, and implement the information and go out and be great. This is your host, Sean Fisher, proud CEO and owner of the Fisher Educational Group. And this has been another episode of FECG TV. And we thank our guests and we thank you all, the audience, for joining us, because without both parties, none of this is possible. So we look forward to seeing you all next Sunday. And until then, have a great week and be safe. And if you're in a place where it's snowy, stay warm. Thank you.